what we're expecting of this group today, actually, the requested action is for you to endorse or actually adopt the 5-year update to the DMC development plan. And I think I've shared with all of you also, this has been in front of City Council also, and they have endorsed this plan in, of course, contingent on this meeting today and your adoption of the 5-year plan. So the 5-year plan, you have in your packet the full plan. And we were, as RT said, we were very committed and diligent about this plan because, like, why would we do a 5-year plan? And there's so many reasons. We want to make sure that all that we're doing, our strategies are matching our market conditions. And we've been updating this plan regularly. So it is basically an update to a plan. We want to make sure that we are accounting for what we did. So we pulled together all the data to say what's happened in these first 5 years. It's so important that we start to share our progress so that people know that the model is working. So that's in the plan. We gathered quite a bit of community input and we intend to continue to do that. So we've had community input sessions on this 5-year plan, and we've changed the plan based on some of that input. And we will continue to have community input. And then, of course, we have to update our plan every 5 years because it's a requirement of the state law. And you know what? It's just good business to continue to update this plan. In this plan, you'll see the first 5-year results, of course, in a package. And then we also will show you the plans for the DMC initiative for the next 5 years, including, as Chair Ryback mentioned, the COVID-19 impact analysis, which we hired a firm called HRNA, which you'll hear about in a minute. So with that, just a snapshot of what you're going to hear, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Patrick Sieb, who provided all the leadership to bring this 5-year plan to fruition. So Patrick, I'm going to turn it over to you, please.
Thank you, Lisa and Mr. Chair, members. I will quickly review some of the material you have already seen because as you recall, you took action on this in August. You directed us to do some additional work, which we've done, and we've brought that in front of City Council that they, as Lisa said, they've acted on. And so today's presentation is going to we're going to spend a bit more time on the new information that you asked us to work on. Before I get to that, though, quickly as a reminder, part of our update is a look back, and this is a clean distillation of how we have made progress in the first 5 years against the metrics that were established in the DMC development plan. And I won't spend time on that. Just know that that's part of this report. Also, as a part of the report is an indication of how resources have been spent. And of the $585 million that you direct, about $98 million were committed during the first phase, catalyzing more than $900 million, nearly $1 billion worth of private development. And again, you can see how that $98 million was used in different categories. When we left you in August, we said that one of the areas of work that we were going to spend time on is the discussion of the impact of the DMC development work with respect to tax impact. And to assist us with that, we retained a firm called Urban 3, who specializes in helping cities understand the impact of development decisions on the growth of the tax base. And we have a webinar that it's arrived on our website. Well worth watching if you had a chance or had an opportunity. A few key takeaways from that presentation was, one, this message that why downtowns matter, and in particular a dense downtown like Rochester, where the amount of tax base generated in a very small geography benefits the entire community. In fact, in Rochester, the DMC district is physically less than 1% of the entire geography of Rochester, and yet it contributes more than 14% of the total property taxes. So part of the message coming out of that work that they did for us is that more than many cities and more than almost any city our size, our downtown is a huge generator of tax capacity that supports the rest of the community. Another piece of work, so, and I can happy to respond to any questions about that. And as I said, we have an hour-long webinar that really has the consultant providing the deep background to all of that work. Another piece of work that you asked us to look at was the impact that COVID would have on our economy. And knowing that it would be both short-term and long-term.
How are you?
Both short-term and long-term. Molly, you may need, Molly.
I am not.
Molly, yeah. Both short-term and long-term. To assist us with that, we retain the firm of HR&A, a New York-based firm that specializes in economic analysis. They've done work here in Rochester, southeastern Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and all over the region in the past. And we asked them to come in and assist us with this analysis. And I'm going to invite a member of that staff, Aaron Lonoff, to walk through their, briefly walk through their analysis. And so with that, Aaron, I will move the slide deck, but I'll let you come on live here.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me? I think that's a yes.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Lonoff. I'm with HR&A Advisors. We are headquartered in New York, but I am based in Minneapolis. I grew up in the region, and as Patrick has said, we've done a lot of work in southern Minnesota throughout the Twin Cities. So I'll walk through our analysis very briefly, and I'm happy to answer questions. And as Patrick mentioned, we also did an hour-long webinar where we walked through sort of the full in-depth analysis. At a high level, as we're thinking about COVID and the economic recovery of COVID, at a very high level, we're thinking about the recovery in 3 stages. This first stage is sort of this economic shock. How deep is this shock going to be as a result of COVID? How many businesses are going to be closed as a result of COVID? And what are all the different economic changes that are going to take place? The next phase is this rate of recovery. How long is it going to take, and what is the shape of that recovery? There's a lot of there's been a lot of sort of look at other pandemics or epidemics, recent epidemics, and a lot of the research around that sort of ties economic recovery with public health milestones and the return of consumer confidence. So that rate of recovery is really going to be tied to consumer confidence and the release of a vaccine or therapeutic for COVID-19. And then this third phase is really about what does the long term look like for the economy in terms of our new normal? What activities are here to stay that we've sort of adopted in COVID, such as remote work? There are likely going to be many office-based jobs that are going to be permanently remote. For example, the Mayo Clinic has announced that 1,500 of its employees are going to be permanently at home in the long term. So post-COVID, how does that affect economic recovery for downtown Rochester and impact planning for the DMC? If you go to the next slide. So our model looks at 3 pieces of the Rochester economy: the direct impacts of COVID-19, the indirect impacts, and the induced impacts, to estimate the total economic change or the total change in economic activity. And these are useful metrics, but what is more useful for your long-term planning and the DMC is translating that economic activity into the change in retail space needs, the change in hotel needs, multifamily development and office, so that you all can make strategic long-term plans and update your 5-year plan for the future. If you go to the next slide, I'll briefly walk through what we found. So Following a significant loss in economic activity, we've projected a gradual recovery in the Rochester economy over the next 2 years. So we were able to look at actual observed data between December of 2019 and June of 2020 and saw a loss in economic activity of about 20%. And that economic activity includes direct jobs, indirect jobs, which are the spending by those employed by those companies, and the induced activity related to that spending of those employees. So said differently, this also includes those who were furloughed and those who are working from home, as their spending was reduced in the Rochester economy. From there, we then began to project out, where do you go from here, and how might recovery look? And we modeled this in 3 scenarios: low, medium, and high, or an optimistic to most conservative scenario, where it varied by when the vaccine or therapeutic might be released, and then therefore soon after when consumer confidence might return. And we also varied this by what the new normal might look like. So in the most optimistic scenario, activity in this new normal phase looks a lot like what December 19 looked like in Rochester, where very few people are working remotely, and the hospitality industry has recovered fully. In the most pessimistic scenario or conservative scenario, we were assuming more remote work for office-based employees and a reduction in the hospitality industry as a result of reduced conferences and perhaps a reduction in the average length of patient stay in Rochester. And that resulted in a 2 to 7% reduction in economic activity in December of 2022 when compared to December of 2019. So let's talk about what Rochester can do and what this means for the DMC. So prior to COVID-19, Rochester had a growing economy. Its development was largely aligned with demand. And there's a lot of uncertainty around COVID-19 that no one fully understands yet. Our model is suggesting that there's going to be excess office capacity due to losses in jobs in this sector, as well as long-term remote work. The retail and restaurant industry in Rochester is going to be disproportionately affected, or particularly the businesses that are most dependent on employees and visitors are going to be disproportionately affected in the long term. Hotels have experienced a precipitous drop in occupancy rates because of the drop in visitors to Rochester. Rochester has a very strong pipeline in hotel rooms, and so the market is going to continue to see occupancy rates well below historical averages. And then finally, housing demand, and this is sort of one of the positives that we're seeing, is that housing demand continues to be strong in Rochester. People need places to live, and we're continuing to see a potential growth for housing in downtown Rochester. And this housing is also going to be important for supporting retail in downtown. So where do we go from here? It's really important that Rochester remain nimble. Unlike other natural disasters, this pandemic has hit every city across the country. It's going on everywhere. The difference is how these cities react and how they plan for their futures. Not all cities are developing recovery strategies. And we applaud Rochester for thinking ahead now, starting now to think about what the near and long term looks like. That's going to put you at a place of strength going forward. So despite significant losses, Rochester has fared better than other cities. Going into this pandemic, you all had a very strong economy, you have strong industries, and you have institutions that are going to put you in a place of strength going forward, including the Mayo Clinic and your healthcare industry. So as you think about the future, we have a number of suggestions on how to remain nimble and the things that you might consider as you develop your strategies. So it's really important that you support your existing local businesses, those that have made it so far and those that are working hard to stay open, it's critical that these retail businesses and these local businesses be supported to ensure vibrancy in Rochester. It's important to prioritize public infrastructure. These infrastructure investments are what make downtown Rochester a great place to visit and live and work. And this is a way to sort of continue to promote Rochester as a place to make investments. There may be ways to creatively reuse your excess real estate capacity. And you can look to other cities on what they are doing right now in COVID, for example, the reuse of hotel rooms. And you can also look to the last economic recession on ways that cities have reused their office buildings creatively, their Class B and C office buildings to conversions into residential, for example. This is an opportunity to diversify the economy. Having a diverse economy is a way that cities make themselves resilient to economic disasters. And this is one way to think about this for Rochester is having a diverse economy will help you get through this. And support development proactively. Think about the ways that you can support investments that are taking place and do this in a way that supports the long-term vision for Rochester and meets the immediate needs of coming out of the COVID recovery or coming out of the COVID crisis.
Thank you, Erin. Mr. Chair, we could pause here for a moment. There is the next piece of this presentation talks about looking forward. Just leave it to you if you would like to engage any conversation with Erin or members of the team at this point.
RT, you're muted.
I'm so sorry. I'm certain there are questions here, but I do think if we got everything on the table, it would help us. So if people wouldn't
Great.
mind to just hold that and have us go through, that would give us a chance to maybe have some questions that we might ask answered in the presentation.
Okay. Great. Thank you then. Just looking forward, we positioned this presentation into 5 buckets. One being looking forward with respect to private investment. And we anticipate our work going forward around private investment in supporting economic diversification, housing affordability, Main Street innovation, supporting local entrepreneurs, and building up the capacity for local minority and women-owned businesses. We have a category we talk about with respect to mobility. This has been a priority for the organization. We have the Rapid Transit Initiative. We're building out micro-mobility options, meaning the whole plethora of options around how people can get into and move about the downtown. We know that there needs to be system-wide enhancements that occur, so it can't just be the new rapid transit line. And then ultimately, it's about the experience we're creating for people so that using these other modes and other options for transportation are equally compelling to single occupancy vehicle. Public realm, Erin talked about the importance of public infrastructure investment. Certainly the public realm is a place where we are doing that. Being more strategic around using public space as a catalyst for economic development. So more than sort of if we build it, they will come, but being more intentional around how public space can help catalyze new investment. Being more intentional about connection to neighborhoods so that we can really create a seamless experience for particularly the close-in neighborhoods to easily access and get to the downtown. Streets and sewers, understanding that these are generational investments. When Urban 3, Joe Minicozy did his presentation, he outlined the aging infrastructure in Rochester that will need to be replaced. And these are generational investments, 50-year investments, some of which are coming due right now. This notion of complete streets approach, and that's sort of a fancy term to say when you dig up a street to put in a sewer, think about everything else that you can do as you're replacing that sewer and replacing that street. And then it ultimately all comes back to the experience we're creating, that we really need to understand the aspirations of people who live in the community, businesses who operate in the community, and patients who are arriving here and visitors who are coming for other reasons, to really understand and really maybe create a Venn diagram that talks about what's the overlap between the experiences that people are looking for in any one of those personas, and really focus on those areas. Sorry, having a little trouble. Aaron mentioned that Rochester, unlike many other cities, is proactively developing a strategy. We have the good fortune of having a strong institution here with Mayo Clinic, but we also have the DMC initiative and the tools associated with that. I mentioned earlier that you've invested about $98 million of the total 585 that's available. In the second phase, we expect that there will be about $200 million available for you to direct into these categories, which are shown here for illustrative purposes or order of magnitude purposes, if you will, not for definition. You will make decisions annually about how resources are spent, but just know that you will be directing about $200 million in public infrastructure investment for mobility in public realms, streets and sewers, catalyzing private development, and the operating and programmatic support necessary. I will just end by saying, even during this year, in actually year one of phase two, a lot has happened. And reconstruction of Peace Plaza underway, the opening of the Wells Fargo renovated Wells Fargo building, Hotel Indigo, which completed its work and had a massed ribbon cutting. The Berkman out near St. Mary's Hospital, 345 housing units. The sewer repair work under 2nd Street, disruptive as it was for a few weeks, now complete. Opening of Crave. There are actually 3 new restaurants that have opened in downtown Rochester during this pandemic, including Crave, as a part of the Indigo development. And then we've seen businesses that have pivoted, become innovative, found ways to continue to serve customers in this new environment. Another new apartment building in downtown, street level retail. And of course, we're thrilled about the groundbreaking that began with 2 Discovery Square, supported by this board in February, and with a lot of hands-on work between the developer, Mayo Clinic, and the community, finding a way to get that project underway in spite of the disruption. So those images are to signal that phase 2 has already begun, and we have a lot of momentum going into phase 2 and a set of strategies to lead us out of our current situation. Mr. Chair, that represents the presentation for the moment, and we'll leave it to you to consider public comment.
Great. We at this point don't have anyone signed up for public comments, so a last call on that.
And the economic analysis, I thought it was just excellent, excellent work. And boy, every city in this country ought to be going through that kind of analysis just to understand, you know, the implications for your community. I'm sure many are, but I thought it was a really good piece of work, and I'm really glad it was part of that. My just my question, my comment goes immediately. So what can accelerate in this next phase? What can accelerate recovery, and what are the strategies in particular? So when I think it was slide 16 that had the 5 or 6 different strategies. Patrick referenced them. To me, it is just my sense. Infrastructure investments, and obviously this next 2 years is kind of a really good time to do city building and placemaking as things are kind of slower and now recovering. So I think that's obvious, but I was really struck by the importance and the priority I think that needs to be placed on infrastructure investments in particular, Housing, it's wonderful to hear that housing remains a strength, even in the midst of this. And I think affordable housing, not surprisingly, I think is particularly important to keep in that mix. Public spaces and equity strategies, I think, are all kind of higher priorities to me that jump out and might be accelerants at a time where things are kind of slowly rebuilding. So I know we'll have lots of opportunities over the course of the next couple of years to approve things as they go along, but I really do hope we place some emphasis. I think those are strengths, and it's a really good time to do some of that work. Transit, I think, is also obviously important as we figure out what the new normal is going to look like. And the new normal will not look like where we were in January of 2020. So just my 2 cents. And again, really, really good work by the staff. And I'm very supportive of the update.
Great. And I have in the queue Member Campbell and Mayor Norton. Anyone else want to get in the queue right now? Got it. Okay, Jim, and just raise your hand and I'll identify you.
No, I agree with Paul. The work is outstanding, and I think it really gives us a clear view of what our priorities should be. Let's face it, the private investment for the next couple of years are going to be really tough. I mean, the people that have already made the investments are going to scramble to just sort of hang on. And so it really comes down to the public sector to sort of step in, and sort of like the state bonding bill. I mean, we tried to get it done. It's a great time to with interest rates low and people looking for work, it's a great time for the public sector, the city and the county. And my sense is, having been in Rochester a lot this summer, the city is really going at it and spending the money, sewers and streets, and I think the focus on streets and sewers, the fact that you dig it up once and fix everything. I mean, now is the time to do that. And it just seems like that's exactly what we should be doing, along with the public realm, the move to the river, those kinds of things we should be working on in the next couple of years while the private sector is sort of catching its breath. And then, as Paul says, the mobility, the transit thing is really critical. And so I guess I know Mayor Norton wants to speak next, but I'd really be interested in hearing what she has to say. I repeat myself, my sense is that the city is really, I thank them and take my hat off to them for really stepping up and starting to deal with these critical infrastructure issues that'll really help us down the road.
Good. Mayor Norton, and then in the queue I have Council President Saber next. Go
Thanks.
ahead,
Yeah, thank you both, Paul and Jim, for those comments. I echo a lot of what you've said, and I'll tell you, we've taken, and DMC takes its fair share of criticism, but I agree that as hard as it was to go through this last summer, we absolutely have to get those sewer systems and this infrastructure done. And I know it felt like a double whammy for some people with COVID and those projects being done. But at least it's not going to be drug out for year after year so that they have multiple year effects. We took advantage as best we can, and we have a lot to learn, and DMC works really hard at this business forward strategy so we can keep, and in fact, I mentioned an issue I saw downtown yesterday. For our businesses, we have to have this construction going on, but we also have to make sure that those businesses have, people can access them, that we're not progressing so fast that we are unwittingly taking parking spaces away from a business where it's their only place for people to pull up in front of their business. We have to really think about those things, and we are moving forward. I agree with the comments that were made. I'm interested in this concept of some of our buildings that maybe, as we've learned, we don't need as much office space, or all the industry is learning that we don't need as much space. Perhaps moving ahead. I do know, though, a lot of employees really want to get back to work. They don't want to be in their homes. So I think it's going to be a mixed response to this. But if we do have some space available, can it be converted into housing at a more reasonable cost than rebuilding something from scratch? And I think that's something we really need to look at our businesses downtown. Maybe it's only a floor of a building. Maybe it's 2 floors of a building. But let's look at that and take advantage of what we may be seeing with some freed up space moving ahead. And of course, transit's important. And the last point that and we're going to be moving ahead with that, and I appreciate both Jim and Paul's comments about that. And the last thing I want to say is a lot of our businesses, of course, are struggling with COVID. DMC has been very active in trying to help people find solutions. They've been part of the team that the city's been working on, the Chamber, Ready, RDA. It's really hard because our hearts break when we see local businesses that aren't doing well. And I'm not sure everybody realizes that. And well, they have to. None of us want any business in town to close down. We want to help them get through it. And DMC has been part of that, helping. What can we do to keep those businesses strong? And I will tell you, I hope anybody that's listening, and I know we've got 50 some people on the line, if you have not watched the webinars that DMC has pulled together, not just this one we've been talking about most recently, but some of the other ones prior to that, they are worth watching. There's wonderful information on there for all of us to know, to understand what's happening in the world beyond our own, square footage, that particularly when we're at home, what's really happening and what are some strategies that we can do moving forward. There's excellent information. And I would just say other organizations like the Chamber have also held really good programs for businesses in town. So just for those of you on the board, take a minute, if you haven't watched the DMC programs, to spend some time looking at them. I think they were very informative and interesting. And for the community at large, I also would recommend doing that, and know that we are doing everything we can, not just as DMC, but as a community, to really support these businesses as we recover. It's going to be a tough go. We all need to work together, and I think we can see good outcomes. But thank you so much for the presentation today.
Great. Council President Saber?
Yes, I just wanted to add a couple of quick comments. You'll notice that the council did approve a resolution in support of the next 5-year plan back in October. And I realize that's a legal or a legislative formality, if you will.
Thinking about economic diversification in the city, it's so dominated by one player. Sometimes we lose sight of other players that really strengthen the economy because of the diversification. I'm thinking that maybe we should sort of think beyond the city limits of Rochester. I mean, I think about McNellius up at Dodge Center, which is just a few miles away. Maybe need to think a little bit more in the region around Rochester, because those are incredible assets to the diversification of southeastern Minnesota. And I think our focus tends to be, in Olmsted County and in Rochester, but there may be some adjacencies here of diversification that are really important for us to not lose sight of.
It's such an interesting point, Jim, and we've thought about this before, because our sphere of influence is very contracted, but our